Hello and welcome everyone to this Q2 presentation with Rottneros. With us today we have CEO Lennart Eberleh and CFO Monica Pasanen. My name is Christopher Berggren and I work for Finwire Media. After the presentation there will be a Q&A, so if you have any questions please visit finwire.tv and click on this Q2 webcast where you can write your questions. It's okay to write them both in Swedish and in English. With that said, I hand over the word to Lennart and Monica.
Thank you, Christopher, and also from my side, hello and warm welcome everybody to the Q2 presentation, and thank you for joining us today. The reason for us to having this now in English, as we had these presentations in Swedish previously, is that we have an increased number of international investors who would like to follow us. And as our courtesy, I hope that is okay for everybody if we, from here on, do this in English. Looking at the second quarter, we see that the very strong pulp market that has influenced the first 6 months of this year has had its effect. And in combination with a very stable production, it is the second best quarterly production in the history of the company in its current form. We can see an improved result on an EBIT level of 97 million Swedish. And at that point, I'd like to thank all our employees who have dedicated their work and worked with us through the pandemic with very difficult situations to have realized this production level as well as very good deliveries. And on the basis of that and a strong balance sheet, we have entered a new financing solution after the end of the quarter, which we would like to talk about as well later on here today. Pulp prices have through this run-up come to a new record level, and it will be interesting to see where we go from here on, but some more words on that going forward. To begin with, and for those of you who are new to us at Rottneros, some words about our company as an investment. We are part of a circular economical model. We have a sustainable and renewable raw material, which comes from the Nordic forests. We make pulp for a huge amount and number of various applications and various numbers of qualities in 2 mills. And that gives us the possibility also to mitigate the ups and downs of the pulp market a bit by searching into stable application areas. We have worked with our balance sheet and the performance of the company over the last years, and can proudly say that we have managed to maintain a very solid balance sheet also throughout the pandemic, and that has paid off and created values for our shareholders. Let's have a look at the market and the trends and challenges we see here. And to begin with, a look into the cyclical market of market pulp. We see here the quarterly average prices for NBSK in Europe. Europe is our largest market, 72% of our sales go into Europe, and thus this is the main external factor we're looking at. Prices have gone up since the low of 2020. And we can also see that the strengthening Swedish kroner over the 6 months on an average basis has led to an increased gap between the blue line, which is the NBSK in US dollars, and the yellow line, which is the NBSK in Swedish kroners. But quarterly prices are not only giving the full picture. It's better to have a more fine resolution of the pricing development, which we can see here. Here it is the NBSK price in US dollars as a monthly average, and that is up until June. We know that at the beginning of July, at the beginning of the third quarter, the current list price is at 1,338 to be exact. So there is a continued price momentum in the market, and that is a consequence of the very balanced stock situation. You see that in the light colored bars days of supply. They are now at 37 for both grades, which is a balanced situation. And for BHKP, that is hardwood, mainly eucalyptus from Latin America, that is below the average that you would eventually see. And for NBSK, it's a little bit above the average for the last 5 years. But it is balanced, and there are also structural changes, such as the logistic problems that we've seen over the last months, that have led to slightly increased stocks by and large. So there is not a huge excess of market pulp around, and this should dampen any price negative development from here. And we also see in our order books and the demands we have from our customers that there is a tight supply in Europe, and customers are looking urgently for quick deliveries, which are not always easy to meet. The European market, as I've said, is our largest market, and this is the total production of paper and board in Europe. More than half of the market now is going into packaging. These are integrated and non-integrated producers, as well as primary and secondary fibers. So for container board, for example, the majority of the fiber supply is coming from recycled fibers, and that is also valid on a global basis. And we see here a certain shortage of recycled fibers in the global market, and that has led to an increased demand for example, unbleached kraft pulp into this segment. But we're coming back to that a little bit later. So if this is the distribution of various grades, this is how these grades have developed during the first 4 months of this year. And again, we are back to a positive development of 1% for all grades driven from the packaging segment. Graphical papers have had a little bit of a weaker start at the beginning of this year, but there have been announcements for machine closures, which have already been effectuated and which will be effectuated during the later part of this year, as well as that if you look into the second quarter and talk to our customers, you have seen a strong demand for graphical paper, and they're recovering from the situation that they have experienced during the pandemic, where we've seen large drops in the demand for graphical papers. So on the basis of that, price increases have been announced in this segment, which should point to positive development going forward. But again, this is just one of the areas we supply to. We're coming to our supplies just in a second. Prior to that, let's have a look at the global pulp market. So far, deliveries have been down a little bit. Europe and America are plus minus zero. China is positive. China is the biggest market for pulp. And if we split this by various grades, the eucalyptus hardwood kraft pulp is down by just minus 1.3, whereas the NBSK is down by minus 4.7. And that is not just a question of demand, but also supply. There have been supply disruptions. There have been downtime in the Nordic hemisphere during the second quarter, where NBSK is primarily produced, and there's a certain catch-up effect from stops that have been delayed from last year, and some unplanned stoppages as well. And as I've said initially, this has led to some urgent demands in certain cases, and the supply situation is tight for NBSK, and that has led to this very dramatic run-up of prices during the first 6 months of this year. And so finally, just a quick view on the distribution of our sales. This is for the full year 2020, but it gives you a flavor of the broad range of qualities as well as applications that we have. Board and packaging has become the biggest area. Here we supply to both integrated as well as non-integrated board and packaging paper producers, and we supply all our grades. It is white and brown, long fiber sulfate, kraft pulp, as well as CTMP and groundwood. Printing and writing, a stable area. especially for the mechanical pulp side. Then we have filters, which is one of the specialities. And here we talk about not that many suppliers of pulp that can be qualified into this area, and it's even a smaller number of supplies into the electrotechnical application. And here that segment has seen some good growth over the last 12 months, and also the change in infrastructure, the need for reinvestment and development of renewable energy sources, which leads to new transformator demands as well as electrical cables that have to be installed, is leading the demand for electrotechnical pulp, which is playing very well into our hands. Having said all that, I leave the word over to Monica to guide you through the financial figures for the second quarter and first half. Please, Monica.
Thank you, Lennart. As we already concluded, or Lennart concluded, we had a strong improvement in results for the quarter, and we will start with a waterfall showing what brought us from 2 million EBIT to 97 million EBIT in the quarter. A big portion comes from price and currency, and the strong pulp market, strong demand and rising prices are now clearly showing in our results. We also have a positive impact from volume. We are higher quarter on quarter compared to last year. One reason is that Rottneros mill had its annual maintenance shutdown in May last year, whereas it will be in September this year. But in general, it was very stable production. Variable costs are contributing with as much as price and currency. And wood is the major part of our variable costs. So a good supply of wood pulp that comes also as a by-effect from the strong sawn timber market, where wood chips and wood pulpwood is a byproduct or stream, also benefits our variable costs. We see an improvement in fixed costs. Again, the stop in Rottneros mill last year has some impact, but we continue to follow our fixed costs and have good cost control. We see a little negative impact from other, that is mainly byproducts. We are selling a bit less and with also lower prices. One thing that we could look a bit closer at is the electricity price development. We see that it's really fluctuating a lot. And at the same time, our electricity price is roughly 26 öre per kilowatt hours, or 0.26 Swedish crowns per kilowatt hour. And that is thanks to our electricity hedging. So even though the price is moving up and down, we're able to keep a fairly stable price. Another thing that is worth mentioning here is you see there are two lines. The darker one is the system price, that is the average price in the Nordics. Whereas we buy most of our electricity in price area 3, where Rottneros mill is located. And starting last year, about a year ago, we see that they can from time to time be diverging quite a lot, which is also why we have changed our electricity hedging policy, so that part of the hedges are done against price area 3 and not all of it against the system price as it was done previously. If we then move on to look at the first half year, the result improvement here is from 50 million last year to 108 million this year. We see here that price and currency actually have a negative effect for the half year. In the beginning of the year, this year, we didn't see the same effect in our own prices of the increased prices. It takes a while before we can invoice at higher, get the increases through, and we also had a negative impact from currency. The volume mix is mainly behind the small negative number for volume, but the big impact is really from variable costs. And again, it is wood that is the major part. We also see that some other input costs like chemicals have contributed positively, but wood is the major part. Fixed cost, same reason as for the quarter, partly depending on how the maintenance shutdowns happen in time, but also good cost control. Looking more at over time how our profitability has developed, we see that 2020 was a tough year. Due to the pandemic, the market was soft, the demand wasn't that strong, and prices were low. But starting this year, we see a good increase of activity in the market, rising prices, and very high demand, which has been almost difficult to meet. If we then look at the balance sheet, we continue to have a very solid balance sheet. Our target is to have an equity to assets ratio above 50%. It is 57%. We have strong liquidity. We generated 80 million in the second quarter, which means also that our net debt was reduced from approximately -80 to -25 million. This also means that we have been looking at our financing, and we have had, can move a page forward, thank you. We have been building our financing on the 400 million bond that we issued in 2017. We decided this spring to redeem these notes early, which was done now in July, so this has happened after the quarter. At the same time, we entered into a new loan facility. We are utilizing 150 million Swedish crowns in a term loan, and we have an additional 100 million in a revolving credit facility. The term of this loan facility is 2 plus an option to extend for a year. And in addition to this, we have since earlier approximately 180 million in unutilized credit. So we have a good liquidity situation. The new financing also means that we can decrease our financing cost with approximately 13 million on annual basis. With that, I hand the word back to Lennart.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I will continue to try and look ahead of how we see our opportunities arising in the future. And there are certain trends which are favoring pulp and forestry products as they are sustainable and renewable. One is a rising middle class, which I think that development had a serious bump during last year. But as the economical development in the world will regain its momentum, that will continue to be a case. More people will move into the urban areas. That will, for example, drive demand for tissue. Tissue is, best made out of pulp. And we also have seen how this social distancing has led to an even further increase in the e-commerce activities. That has been a strong demand before, that has accelerated tremendously over the last 12 months. And that is driving the number and the amount of packaging in general, utilizing both recycled fibers, but in the long run, even primary fibers. As you could say, recycled fibers do grow on trees. They're not found anywhere else. You cannot recycle a fiber until infinity. So after 7 to 8 turns, you will need to add on some new fibers into that cycle. Textile is a very interesting area, not for Rottneros specifically, but for the pulp industry overall. The majority of clothes in the world is made of polyester, more than 60%, which also connects to the last point, which is sustainability, and that is not a sustainable way of producing clothes. But if you would utilize dissolving pulp, which you already do to some extent, and even a larger extent is expected going forward, you can make textiles from trees, which is certainly a better way. And it's also easing the demand for cotton, which is very water intense, and cotton is grown and harvested in areas where you should better make food for the people living there. And of course, we have sustainability, not the least seen by the EU efforts to become carbon dioxide neutral, and all the efforts which are made through coming legislation to really move into the direction to work against climate change. And that's certainly something that is asking for products that are coming from a renewable source, such as fibers. And we do have well-managed forests in Scandinavia. We have a forest volume that has been growing throughout the industrialization of the modern world. And that gives us a very strong comfort and self-confidence for saying that this is part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And we will continue discuss that with legislators. But you can see there on sustainability, packaging is certainly an area which is important. You can see there an example of a molded fiber tray, and that is an area we have our own interest in Rottneros Packaging. We have commissioned a new production line now. We have been in this area since 2006, and now we've taken a new step. We do make products with a modified atmosphere, which allows our customers to pack food stuff, ready-made meals, not in a frozen supply chain, but in a cool supply chain with shelf life up to 2 to 3 weeks. And that is top-notch for this kind of packaging. You have not seen that in the market before, and this gives us also great confidence that this is a business model that we can develop forward. We have identified a partner, and we are in discussions of how to go from our pilot plant in Sweden into a larger scale operation closer to where consumers in Europe are, which is on the continent. So a Central European partner will have a very good geographical fit and position. And we see that the interest from the market is growing every day. So summing it all up, we have a strong pulp market, 6 months of consecutive price increases. We see the efforts that we have put into controlling the things we can control, that is our operations, continuous improvements, preventive maintenance, health and safety, is leading to good operations, and that is resulting in good numbers. We have maintained our balance sheet throughout the pandemic. We have a new financing solution in place, and we also taken considerable steps in packaging going forward. And with that, I leave my words back to Christopher to guide us through a question and answer session. Please, Christopher.
Thank you for the presentation. So let's start with the Q&A then. First question, is there something special you would like to highlight regarding Rottneros during the last quarter or during 2021 so far?
I think what we want to point out, and that is just what I've said in my summing up comments as well, is that we focus on what we can focus to make sure that this company is managed and operating in a good way. We deliver customer value. Our customers are grateful for the qualities we supply. We have long-standing customer relations, and that is key to be able to navigate through a cyclical market. And we see the results of all the investments that have been made, and also the investments into our people and the focus on health and safety, as well as psychological safety and work environment, not least throughout the pandemic. And if the stars are right, this leads to a fantastic result for the group as such. So I think that really sums the situation up.
Okay, great. Thank you. We received some questions from the audience. So let's start with the first one. Where do you see inflation in your input costs?
Can I leave that to Monica?
Yeah, as stated, the majority of our input costs come from wood, and there we haven't seen inflation. But of course, we are not immune to inflation. So when many other raw material prices have increased, and that has also affected us. But as we are mainly the biggest part of our cost, if we talk about the variable costs, they are coming from wood raw material and electricity, which have a slightly different cycle than other inflationary products.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How does your environmental permits look like? What's the investment needed to keep them intact?
We have received our new environmental permit for the Vallvik mill at the end of last year, and it has been effectuated in January of this year, which has led to a 30 million Swedish kronor investment in further environmental alternations of our process. And with that, we think that we are where we have to be. We still have a temporary permit, and we are seeking the final what you could call that, the final numbers for our utsläpp. Now
Emissions.
And for Rottneros mill, and there we have 2 years until the end of 2020 to agree with the local authorities on the final emission numbers, and we have to wait and see what those will be before we can have an estimate of coming investments in connection with that.
Okay, thank you. In terms of investments, for how long can you grow your volumes without any major investments?
When it comes to investments, you have to differentiate between the ones that are to maintain and continuous improvements. And for the next coming years, we think we can still squeeze out a couple of percentage points by focusing on continuous improvements and having our guidance of 100 to 120 million in annual capex. But any major capacity move up and above that would need a strategical investment, which is outside the 100 million that we have been guiding for at this point.
Okay, thank you. Next question then. Is this pulp cycle different from historic patterns, or do you think it will peak here and go down to, let's say, $800 per ton next 12 to 18 months?
That is a very difficult question, and I'm not really sure if I've got all the information and variables at my hand to have a well-founded answer to that. But if we look at the fundamentals that we know, we see that we have a balanced stock situation on a global basis. We're entering into a situation where we think that demand in China will come back. We have seen that Chinese prices have come down, but they have turned around and come up again. The Shanghai future, which can give some indication of where Chinese prices are going, has had a turnaround and has come up again. There is currently on the NBSK side no major investments in the coming 12 months coming on stream, and also on the eucalyptus side we will have to wait until the later part of 2022. So giving all that and a world that goes back to more normal activities with an underlying economic growth, which always has a positive impact also on forestry products, I would assume that we have a balanced situation going forward. So will we see the same crashes in 2019? Things can happen. Is it likely? Not maybe as much as it was then in 2019. So we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Nordic Paper is closing down their pulp production in Säffle. Does that affect you in any way?
We will have to see, but the primary effect of that, of course, will be that there is an excess of raw material in the area. And then how Nordic Paper decides on how they want to sort of catch those volumes with own investments or others, that is a question for Nordic Paper. But it will ease up a little bit the situation and continue to have a good balanced raw material market in Midwestern Sweden.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you give us more color regarding potential dividends?
That is a question for the board and ultimately the shareholders and the General Assembly. What we have done through our finance agreement with the bank is open up for the possibility. The bond previously had a covenant that was only allowing us to pay out dividends on the previous year's profits. As you know, 2020 was not a profitable year, so there were no proceeds that could have been paid out. But we now have a possibility to look a little bit further back in history, and that is opening up for that. So I leave that question to the board to come back to after the summer.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me see if we have additional questions. I think we do. So, how has the discount levels developed during Q2?
The discount levels, I assume, are meant to the list price of the NBSK, and those are usually only negotiated once a year, so they haven't changed anything during Q2.
Okay, thank you. And if we look forward a bit, how is your visibility going into second half of this year?
Our visibility is no better than anyone else's. Raw materials, I think we have a stable situation. There is an excess of wood pulp, as Monica has explained. We still have the bark beetle situation, which is very critical in mid-Sweden. That is driving harvesting and thus the volumes of wood pulp. There's still a strong sawn timber operation, which leads to pulpwood chips. So raw material going forward, I think we don't see any changes. Market-wise, we still are in a strong situation. Europe is still in a tight supply situation. We will also enter Q3 with coming maintenance stops, not the least our own mills in Rottneros and Q4, early Q4 in Vallvik. So the supply situation for NBSK, all other alike, and not giving any big disruptions from a fourth wave of coronavirus, should lead to a stable market situation going forward. And that is as much as we can say, I think, at this point. And then everybody should have their own view on exchange rates, which of course are also an important part of how we turn dollars into kronas in our P&L.
Okay, great. Thank you for the answer. You have touched on this, but where do you see wood costs for H2 if you compare them to H1, given current price levels?
I think they will be unchanged.
Okay, good. Let's see if we have any additional questions here. I think that was the final. No, we have one regarding, if we look forward a few quarters, what will be Rottneros's main focus? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes, we will continue to focus on the things that we can have an impact on. And that is our operations, that is the health and safety of our employees, that is ensuring that we can supply according to the contracts, the qualities that our customers expect from us. We will continue to develop our packaging operations, and if everything works fine, create shareholder value by being able to pay out dividends going forward as well. Other than that, we will have to see and be a bit more opportunistic on situations that can arise.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was the final questions from the audience. And with that said, I will hand over the word to Lennart and Monica to finish off this session.
Well, thank you, Christopher. And once again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Here in Sweden, it was a sunny and warm day, and we will release you hopefully to some well-earned vacation. This concludes the second quarter, which has been a good quarter for Rottneros. You saw that at the quarterly development of the profits. It's amongst the 5 best for the company in its current form, and certainly ranks very high, and also production-wise, it has been a good quarter. So going forward, I think that sustainability will continue to drive demand for forestry products. And having said all that, I want to thank our employees, our customers, suppliers, and investors to have confidence and faith in us as a value creator over time. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.